Thanks again, Judy. So my name is Ben Richardson, and I'm the Chief of Planning and Partnerships for the Southern Campaign of the American Revolution Parks Group, which consists of 4 National Park Service units. That includes Cowpens National Battlefield, Kings Mountain National Military Park, 96 National Historic Site, and the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail. And I also serve as the site manager for the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail. And so we're really happy to be able to be a part of this and to share some of our examples and hopefully successes that we've had up and down our 330-mile corridor of the Overmountain Victory Trail. So the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail sits in a family called the National Trail System, and that's comprised of National Scenic and National Historic Trails. National Scenic Trails are those that you've probably heard of, such as the Appalachian Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, and several others. And then the National Historic Trails include those such as the Lewis and Clark Trail, the Oregon Trail, Mormon Pioneer, the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail, and several others. Now, in order to be given the distinction for Congress to enact a trail as a National Historic Trail, it has to have national significance. And so if you'll permit me, I'll give you a little bit of background to the Overmountain Victory Trail. Generally, the Overmountain Victory Trail commemorates the campaign of 2,000 horse-mounted militia en route to the Battle of Kings Mountain in 1780. So in 1780, the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, had been going on for approximately 5 years, for roughly 5 years. And by all accounts, it was a stalemate. There had been some significant victories for the Patriot forces and some significant victory for the Loyalist forces as well. But they offset each other, and neither was in a clear position to be the victor at that point. So Lord Cornwallis, the commander of the British forces in the American colonies, he embarked on what he called his Southern strategy. And his intention was to capture port cities and move his way north to undercut General George Washington out from underneath him and secure victory for the British Army. And initially, he was very, very successful. Right away, he captured Savannah and Charleston, port cities. He took over Charlotte in North Carolina and had several other major victories, including Camden and Waxhaws, and was beginning to move his way up north, as his plan indicated. And then he put British Major Patrick Ferguson in charge of gathering up all those Loyalist forces, so those American colonists, those colonists that were loyal to the Crown of England and wanted to remain a colony of England. He put Patrick Ferguson in charge of gathering up all those and creating an army in the South. And Patrick Ferguson was very good at that, but he made one fatal flaw, one fatal error. He sent out an edict to those frontiersmen, those Overmountain men, those people that were living on the western Appalachian Mountains, and told them, this is what he said, to lay down their arms and join the Loyalist army, or else their farms will be burned and their leaders will be hanged. Now, for those Scotch-Irish that were living on the western Appalachians, they didn't take too kindly to those strong words. And so what did they do? Instead, they mustered. They gathered themselves up and created an entire militia army. Not a single one of them was enlisted in the Patriot Army. They were an entire militia. They mustered starting in Abingdon, Virginia, and in Elkin, North Carolina. And they moved their way south, combined their forces to over 2,000 men, pursuing Major Patrick Ferguson roughly 300 miles until they met him at Kings Mountain on October 7th in 1780. Now, this battle took place on October 7th, like I said, and it lasted 1 hour and 5 minutes. The Patriot militia, those Overmountain men, killed Patrick Ferguson, killed several other Loyalist forces, and took the remainder captive in 1 hour and 5 minutes. A few months after that, there was the victory at Cowpens, which also we administer here with the National Park Service. And there were several other critical victories for the Patriot forces, which ultimately led to Lord Cornwallis to retreat further up north until his back was against the wall in Yorktown, and ultimately he surrendered his forces to General George Washington, thus effectively ending the American Revolution. It was such a critical victory that years later, Thomas Jefferson, when writing his memoirs and his notes to colleagues, he indicated that victory at Kings Mountain he considered to be the turning point of the American Revolution, and truly it was, because 1 year and 12 days later, Cornwallis surrenders his British forces to General George Washington, and thus securing the American freedom. So that's a little bit of a historical background to the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail, and now for its legislative history. In 1977, U.S. Senator James Broyhill of North Carolina pushed the legislation to have Congress create the Overmountain Victory Trail as a National Historic Trail to be administered by the National Park Service. The bill was signed by President Carter in 1980 on the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Kings Mountain, and that gave the Overmountain Victory Trail the distinction of becoming the first National Historic Trail on the eastern corridor of the United States. And to date, we have approximately 65 miles of the 330 miles that's publicly accessible for visitors to come and walk in the footsteps of their patriot ancestors. So, the northern terminus, as I mentioned, is in Abingdon, Virginia, and we also have an eastern terminus. The trail makes a sort of Y, and so the eastern terminus is in Elkin, North Carolina. These two branches move south through East Tennessee and western North Carolina until they meet in Burke County, North Carolina, in Morganton at a place called the Quaker Meadows. The combined forces move south through Rutherford County and Polk County and up to the upstate of South Carolina, where it crosses through Cowpens National Battlefield and ultimately terminates at Kings Mountain National Military Park. Now, given the size of the Overmountain Victory Trail, we are entirely a partnership effort, entirely. So much so that the National Trail System Act actually requires these federal agencies that administer national trails to work with partners on purpose. The idea is to make these a community-driven effort so that the community owns it, embraces it, and is going to make sure that it has success. So we have a variety of federal partners, of course, the U.S. Forest Service and the Pisgah and Cherokee National Forests. Our trail crosses through the W. Kerr Scott Reservoir, which is administered and managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we cross through 4 National Park Service sites, including the Blue Ridge Parkway, Cowpens, Kings Mountain, and we intersect the Appalachian Trail right on the North Carolina and Tennessee state line at Yellow Mountain Gap. We have a variety of state partners across our 4 states, including Sycamore Shoals, Hampton Creek Cove, Lake James State Park, which we're working on a great project with them right now with their brand new visitor center to have permanent exhibits of the Overmountain Victory Trail within their visitor center, which is a really great win for everyone at that point. And then we also go through South Mountain State Game Lands and South Mountain State Park as well. We have 18 different counties that we go through across our 4-state corridor, and so we have many, many county and municipal partners, including our trailheads and significant trail sections at Alexander's Ford and around the Lake Walchel Trail, which is managed by the City of Gaffney Board of Public Works. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we also have many private landowners who we are partners with. This picture here is in Elkin, North Carolina. It's a section of the Overmountain Victory Trail that crosses through private land by way of an easement. So, considering the size and the breadth of our trail, many years ago in 2014, we determined that we wanted to make sure that we could secure as much and as many miles as we possibly could of the Overmountain Victory Trail on the ground, built and constructed so that the public could walk in their footsteps, ultimately, hopefully, walk from Abingdon and Elkin all the way down to Kings Mountain so that they could walk in the footsteps of their patriot ancestors in the footsteps of such a critical time in our history. And so what we did is we broke the trail out into 10 different planning phases, and so far we've completed 5 master plans. We're in the process of completing and nearing completing numbers 6 and 7, which is from Spruce Pine, Lake James State Park, and also Rutherfordton to Chesney, South Carolina. And we're set to, this coming summer, initiate our plan from Rutherfordton to Morganton, North Carolina. These plans are funded by a variety of different partners. The National Park Service contributes a significant amount, anywhere from 50 to 70% of the funding, but then we also look to the local governments, nonprofits, and corporations, and we do this intentionally. Now, conceivably, the Park Service could afford to pay for the entirety of these master plans. As Judy had mentioned, we also work with our partners to make sure that they're securing a consultant who's going to be dedicated solely to this planning effort, and conceivably, we could afford that. However, we know that by engaging these local governments, nonprofits, and so forth, that we're going to have, these entities are going to have more skin in the game. They're going to show up to meetings, and they're going to make sure that this plan is successful and that they're going to be able to implement major project areas. So here's a map that shows the 10 different planning phases. As I mentioned, right now we're completing the Spruce Pine to Lake James plan, which is really neat. It also has a split right here coming down through the Pisgah National Forest, and we're also working on the Rutherfordton to Chesney plan right here. So, How we go about our planning process, the first thing we do is we want to identify feasible trail routes as close as possible within our half-mile corridor. Congress has given us what we call a 1 mile wide corridor. So what it is a half mile on either side of the center line of what we know to be what the Overmountain men would have taken, the route they would have taken on their way to Kings Mountain. So we have approximately a half mile on either side, so a mile wide corridor that we can plan trail. We work to engage our stakeholders and landowners from the very beginning all the way through the end of the planning process. We want to make sure that we have a very visual plan based on landowner and stakeholder feedback so that this plan can be pulled off the shelf by anyone, really anyone, planners, the public alike, and it can be easily understood and implemented. And a major piece is we want to support community goals. The last thing that we want to do is have a plan that is directed entirely by the National Park Service, by the federal government, pushing our own agenda and telling these communities this is how it is, this is how we want it to be, and this is what you're going to get on board with. We would not have any engagement. We wouldn't be making friends, certainly, and it wouldn't be successful because we need these partners. And so oftentimes our local counties and communities that we work with, they have their own recreational goals and agendas that we work very hard to engage and incorporate those into our planning efforts. So a quick case study, we'll look at one plan that we recently wrapped up where we've had some great success on in pretty short order as well. So from Chesney to the city of Chesney in the upstate of South Carolina to Kings Mountain National Military Park. So what we do is we've developed what we call a master cooperative agreement with our lead management partner, the Overmountain Victory Trail Association. And so then we can initiate task agreements with the OVTA for master planning under this agreement. That allows us to transfer our portion of the funding and also all the other partner fundings to the Overmountain Victory Trail Association, who's a nonprofit, so that they can hold that funding, and then they thus can contract with a consultant for the planning efforts. And this streamlines our awarding process as well through the federal government and our financial assistance office. So once we've initiated that task agreement, we start looking at who are our stakeholders, who are the people that are going to have a vested interest, who are those municipalities that are going to be key to driving this boat, making sure that this is successful. So for that plan, from Chesney to Kings Mountain, right here we have 8 or 9 different partners that we knew we needed to engage thoroughly and have on board, whether it was in a financial capacity or helping to guide the planning efforts to make sure that this was a successful plan. Then what we do is we move into an MOU execution. So what this does is it kind of transfers that sort of informal handshake agreement. Everyone's excited about a master plan. Let's see how we can get more trail built, how this is going to impact and improve our community and so forth. It kind of shifts it into a more formal agreement at that point. A formal arrangement codifies our relationship. It details out who's going to have what responsibilities, who's responsible for what funding amounts, and who's going to go for additional funding for plan implementation. And we came around to this a few master plans into our efforts because we were having, like what Judy mentioned, we were having issues with getting people to show up to meetings, getting people to be engaged. And so what we did then is we started requiring a partner match for the funding of these master plans, and then an MOU where there's a signature on a piece of paper, a document that essentially formalizes that relationship, saying this is how we're going to work forward in this partnership. What we did is establish a timeline. We want to make sure that we're getting these plans done as quickly and as expediently as possible. In the federal government, things move very, very slowly, as I'm sure most folks are aware of. And so we want to make sure that by way of our partner group, the OVTA and the other partners, that we're selecting a consultant that's going to help steer this, that's going to have this be their priority. We're going to work in hand and in concert with them, and that it'll be done expediently within a year to 16 months. After we've determined what that timeline will be, we take an inventory of those existing conditions within that planning section. That includes both natural and the built environment that we can use both to our advantage and also that might be presenting constraints to us as we go through the plan. And because we're a historic trail, we want to make sure that we're inventorying our historic resources as well and highlighting and capitalizing on those because we're a historic trail. But even for communities that are working on purely recreational assets or amenities, I think it's imperative to incorporate those historic resources because more and more we're finding that people are getting more and more interested in not only their own history, their own ancestry and genealogy, but also the history of where they come from and where they currently live.